So the idea is essentially just to give a wee overview of trees in Harris. And I'm talking about Harris trees, not new trees. But by the end, we will reach also the current tree planting program we have around here and discuss a bit the incentives behind it and why does it matter to do this and how are we doing it. And we can, at the end of it, talk, and if you have any questions as well, do not state. So I'm from the ranger here in North Harris, and as winter is coming, one of the main things I'll be spending my day doing is planting trees. And in the past couple of years with the tree planting program I mentioned, we've also been doing, here, please come, you're welcome, thanks. We just started. So in the past couple of years with the tree planting program I've been mentioning, we've also been kind of exploring our own ancient trees that I mentioned and currently building a sort of small database of our groves and what it's like. And I'll show you some pictures of that today. So, and all of the pictures that you see are pictures taken in Harris by myself for most of them. So I would like to start with a Gaelic concept or two, because I guess that's kind of the mindset behind many of the things I'll be talking about. And one of the key words here, one of what I think is one of the most important words, is dh'òraid. Comes from Taigh, which means the country in Gaelic, and dh'òraid is something that is often translated as natural heritage. It can mean culture, it can mean many things. It is essentially the relationship that exists between a community and its environment. So dh'òraid will include things like golden eagles in Harris, they're part of our dh'òraid. Trees in Harris, as we'll see, are part of our dh'òraid. But peat cutting is also part of the dh'òraid. So it includes human practices as well as the environment itself. So it is kind of important to look at it this way here, through this Gaelic mindset that both words, dh'òraid and dh'òraid, which can be translated in Gaelic as culture, do not separate the environment from people. There is no such separation traditionally in Gaelic. And so every time you talk about the environment, every time you talk about nature, you're necessarily talking about people. And in many ways, doing a split like we do it in English, in French, and in other languages would be the same as saying there is on one side deer and on the other side nature. There is on one side trees and on the other side nature. It would make absolutely no sense. So that's a mindset that I think is important here, especially when I come to the incentive behind the tree planting program here. And yeah, as I was saying, even though you might drive through Harris and saying, one thing that is not part of our dh'òraid is trees. You have trees in Tarbert. Tarbert has a fair amount of trees. Many people who are born and bred here will tell you that they were not there when they were children. Pictures of Tarbert 60 years ago would show you a very bare landscape, not many trees about. That has changed a lot. And for many people here, including indigenous people, the idea of trees is a remote one. I remember asking, as an anecdote, in Gaelic, the words and nuances for blue and green are very different from English. And I remember asking people in Gaelic, the word for blue is also used for grass, or like the word that would be translated as blue is used for grass. I was asking, what about tree leaves? And the elders I was asking looked at each other and said, I don't know. I never had to think about the color of tree leaves before, because when I grew up and I was learning Gaelic with my parents and grandparents, we never ever commented on the color of tree leaves. That was just not part of life. So, but despite that, as I said, trees are actually a thing around here. Here's a quote from Peggy Anafiomi Alik Nachmaden from Urras Ceann. Coilltean, the forest of Harris. Not many people today would believe that there were ever trees here, but there were. It was a forest. She was a Shanachi, a storyteller, tradition bearer, I would say. And she talked about how back in the olden days, there were actually many trees here. And many people who cut the peat here would be extremely aware of it. If you cut the peat deep enough in many areas, you actually find wood, tree trunks collapsed trees, and so on, traces of that old forest. So there's always been in Gaelic tradition that awareness that one day here, a long time ago, there was a forest. And in many ways, there was. And there was throughout the Hebrides when the first people settled here 9,000 or so years ago. The oldest settlement back in South Harris is about 9,000 years ago. These people would have been in a very different landscape, a landscape that would have been filled with trees. Do not necessarily imagine a very thick canopy, the kind of which you will find in the Caledonian rainforest on the mainland. Imagine something maybe more sparse, the like of which you would find, say, if you've ever been to Glen Shiel, for instance, on the mainland, and looking around yourself, you will see mix of crags and bare landscape with big thickets of trees all over the place. So something very, very wooded, but not a thick canopy we imagine when we think about forest. Oops. We're not exactly sure all the details of how it happened, but it wasn't humans. We didn't do it this time. Trees disappeared. At the end of the last ice age, the most likely explanation is climate change. When the ice age ended, there was climate change throughout our planet. It affected rainfall, it affected temperatures, and it affected overall humidity levels. And it seems that that shift quite brutally was a bit brutal for most of our trees here. Oh, dh'òraid yourself, welcome. So at the end of the last ice age, what's the ice age part of history, so you're very early on. This climate change would have affected the trees very negatively, and many of them collapsed. Many of them couldn't bear this change, and they did not just disappear. Everything transforms, and they transform into the landscape that dominates us today, which is peatland. Peatland being peat in very short, condensed way, being very, very packed biomass that has degraded and is building up year after year over the centuries and millennia. So, which is why at the bottom of that pit, often you will find the trees. They were the beginning of it in many ways. It is likely that in the Middle Ages, when the Scandinavians came here and decided that this would be a very nice part of Norway, there were still more forest than today. Probably not expansive areas, but small woodlands here and there. And what was left of that was probably chopped down for housing, for boats, etc. And as humans introduced to these islands grazing animals, every time a tree was chopped, it had no chance. There was no chance of recovery because deer, which were introduced, are not, well, they're natives, they've been native for at least 1,000 years and more, but they're not originally native. They were introduced with sheep and cattle. They would eat the sprouts, eat the saplings, and trees would not recover as they would naturally otherwise. And so bit by bit, that forest really disappeared from most of our landscape. It is still present in our place names, some of them, which place names are part of the dh'òraid I mentioned earlier on. There is a Scandinavian word, for instance, londevat. It's not far from here on this picture. This was taken in winter, so the trees are not very impressive, but you have birch, you have rowan, you have willow growing in there. So londevat means the river of the grove, quite simply. Spoiler alert, we're planting heavily there, so it's probably going to need a new name, like the river of the impressive subforest of Harris, but we'll keep to that. Possibly when it was named by Scandinavians back then, it would have had more trees. There is a place in Scalpay, which is not the most tree-covered place in Scotland, called Loch nan Coilltean, the Loch of the Woodlands, quite simply. There are a few trees, I think, back there. Again, nothing extremely impressive, but traces of why this name exists. And we're talking about Tarbert. Tarbert has trees now, didn't have that many back in the days, but a place that always had trees is on the other side of the Loch. On the east side of Tarbert, you have a place called clàradh, which means the small tree, the wee tree. It can also in place name mean the place of trees. So the trees that you see hanging on that crag by the marina are actually Harris trees. Some of them were probably helped and grew since we planted more in Tarbert, but many of them are native trees, hence the name. And there are other examples. The last one is ath-neartachadh, the stream of the rowan tree, at the top of which guess, is rowan trees. There are quite a few in the areas. Rowans are probably the most ubiquitous trees in our hills. They're extremely tough, and they can survive in the most unlikely places, hanging on to crags. So those are quite common around, but they're not the only one. So these old groves, dh'òraid in Gaelic means a grove. Coilltean we saw earlier on is a forest. Dh'òraid is a grove. The city of Derry, for instance, in Northern Ireland, it means dh'òraid. It's a place of oaks originally, and in Gaelic it extended to mean any grove. What we had left is called remnant woodland often. As the name indicates, it's whatever is left of that old forest. And it manifests in Harris as groves, sometimes very small groves of trees tucked safely away from predation. So wherever a sheep or a deer would not dare go down because it's a bit too dangerous, you will have an aspen tree, or a rowan, or a willow, or a birch. A few of them I named here were, as I said, I was trying to catalog them a bit to have a clear idea of where the species are. There is one in Gilwushka by Glan-Vigado. If you walk up there, just behind Bheurla, tucked away in a gully, you will see it from the path. You will see a big, very big aspen tree and a couple of trees around it. That gully actually has 100 trees in it. So it feels from afar, it's just 4 or 5, but it's way more. Counted them myself. You will find willows. You will find aspen, very, very big aspens. You will find rowans. And then you will find the plants that go with it, because groves aren't only about trees. The trees will also support other forms of life that might struggle in heathland and peatland. So you will find bilberries. You will find honeysuckle and this sort of other plants that might not have a good chance elsewhere. There is one in Skördal, which is by Coilltean, just before you turn towards Hushinish. There is a glen there, just on the side of Tarbert. And down there in a gully, rowans, willows, even at least one hazel tree growing down there. Ath-neartachadh, which is just at the entrance of Scaldell. There is, tucked away, once again in a gully, a few birch, rowans, one dog rose somehow, and a few other of these plants. The ones you might have seen if you went down to Rennikadol is probably one of the most impressive remnant woodland, one of the most extensive one. On the shores of Rennikadol, as you follow the Postman path, you will find as well birch, rowan, aspen, etc. growing pretty thick on the crags there. I would say Rennikadol is probably the densest part of remnant woodland. And some of these trees are possibly very, very old. It's also one of the most accessible from the road. You can park and start walking the Postman path and you will see it straight away. The one that you see here on the picture is Aven-Kionloche, which is in Glan-Trollemarek. As you continue around the Postman path, those are mostly aspen trees, some of them pretty big and healthy. Aspen trees reproduce by sprouting from their roots. So usually you have a very big one and you have small sprouts. So you have a few there. If they're accessible to deer, they might not make it to adulthood, but some of them are pretty healthy. And the last one I'm mentioning is a bit further. If you go to Urras Ceann, Fitten Chirigilaniar is a kind of a pass between two hills, and in which you will find some hazel, some dwarf juniper, etc. growing as well. This is just a small example, but there are quite a few. And as I said, you have clàradh just here in Tarbert as well. So what I'd like to do is just share some pictures of them so that you actually have an idea of what Harris trees might look like. So this is Gilwushka in Glan-Vigado. From the path, you will see this one, very big, very beautiful aspen tree, surrounded by a couple of other aspens and then some big healthy rowans as well. If you go up there and you were to go by the river, it's fairly steep, but if you're biped instead of quadruped, it's actually fairly easy to go down. And you will find mushrooms that you won't find elsewhere. You will find loads of bilberries, as I said, and other more woodland species that might not thrive on the moorland. And so here is a rowan tree, just still, it was early autumn, so it was starting to lose its leaves when I took the picture. It was a big, nice bush of bilberries here. It's a kind of environment, sometimes some of these groves don't look like much, and then you're in the middle of the trees and almost feels like a woodland. This one is out of Clàradh, is in Scaladow. So as you go down toward Glen Scaladow, going north to Lewis, you can stop there at the turn at the entrance of the glen there and just follow the river to your left. And you will find these tucked trees by a waterfall, quite a few birch, rowans, as I said, one dog rose, and quite a few willows of different species. We have lots of subspecies of willows hybridize very easily. So you can find grey willows, osier willows, eared willows. At the end of the day, it's all willows. And so that's another example of what it can look like. As you see, it's very sparse, it's not extremely dense, but they can contain way more trees that you might expect at first. This is one of my favorite, Avin Scoidel. So Scoidel, as I said, just behind Tarbert. And if you follow the river there, you will reach that crag. Both pictures taken from the same place, just turning around. You find big rowans, quite a few willows, at least one hazel, if not more, and all hanging off the cliff. And you can see, as I said, that they're surviving there because they're not getting predated on. Nice place to swim as well, with a wee pool, natural pool there. And here, just three other examples out Larkestale, so in Glen Larkestale to the east of Tarbert. If you were to go to the very end of the loch, one of the rivers or streams that go down, as you follow it, you will find trees popping here and there, including this very big, majestic rowan coming out, surrounded, as I said, again, bilberries, mushrooms, all these sort of things you don't really see often. Clonloche, I mentioned earlier on, is the one in Glan Trolomarec between Mollinganishan and Renigedol. And this one is one of the maybe least accessible if you don't like hiking. It is by the village of Chirascal, the abandoned village of Chirascal in Loch Research. So at the utmost north point of North Harris. Birch, rowans, willows as well, growing up there. And this one, like in Renigedol, will grow directly by the sea. It's not fresh water underneath. So those were some pictures for old groves. This picture is a bit more recent. It is taken from the Woodland Archvully. So about 25 years ago, a crofter up in Bheurla decided that he wanted to do something for the community, and what he did was the Woodland Archvully, which is now a healthily growing woodland with many alders, many birch mostly. Those are the two dominant species up there. And it takes time. So various species I mentioned, as you might have noticed, are broadleaf trees. We do have dwarf juniper in the more coniferous type. They're very, very small, as the name indicates, not always easy to locate. And we know that a long time ago there was Scots pine. We don't have any ancient Scots pine in North Harris at least. But mostly it was broadleaf, and these broadleaves take a long time to grow. So Archvully has been about for 25 years. And as you can see from the picture, you can actually walk and feel like you're in a woodland. And look around and you're only surrounded by trees. It's not much yet. If you drive past, you might look and see that there are loads of places in it that are bare. It's just heathland from a distance. If you were to walk on the heath, you will notice sprouts of birch and alders coming through the heather, which means that in 20 years from now, the landscape down there will be extremely different from what you're seeing today. And it's all natural regeneration. The soil of Harris, obviously, as I said, used to have forest in it. Not so long ago, it used to have crops, an awful lot of crops. So it's not as bare and infertile as people might think. It's actually, and trees seem to take a liking to many of these places. There is another regenerated woodland way smaller. In Glan Miavek, in Miavek Nambiaun, when you go to the Eagle Observatory, you will see very small saplings. And when you reach a bridge, you will see 12-year-old trees, 10 to 12-year-old, I think. Oaks, willows, rowans, birch, similar species. We're only aiming at native species. And they're also growing very well, even though if you look at the rest of the landscape, it just looks like a bog that's not very welcoming to trees, but they seem to be taking a liking to it, as I said. And that brings me to what we're doing now, essentially, habitat regeneration. So what we're doing for the coming few years is we're planting a lot of these trees in selected areas of shallow peat. And the aim is not to replace our landscape. Peat has been here for thousands of years. It is our landscape. It belongs to Harris. We don't want to damage it. What we want to do is to support our biodiversity and support the existing woodland that I was telling you about. It is there. It has been struggling for thousands of years, but it's also been carrying its life, and we want to make it, we want to help it continue healthily by planting new trees. This is a young alder. It was planted this past winter. It was that tall. It was just one stick. And that's a picture I took sometime in the summer. Alders really, really like our extremely wet soil. So it's a multi-year habitat regeneration project, a bit under 180,000 native trees. So when I say native trees, I mean the various species I mentioned, rowan, birch, hazel. We are reintroducing species that used to be in Harris, that are not in Harris anymore, such as alder, few Scots pine, and oak. And these seeds come from the mainland highlands, and most of our seeds also come from here, from these trees I showed you, from the pictures, and from trees in Lewis as well. We work with nurseries in South Harris and in Lewis, and many of them collect their seeds directly here. So nothing better to survive our weathers than trees that have done so for a very, very long time. Where are we planting? Where will you expect to see new woodland in 20 years from now? Mostly to the east of Tarbert. So the shores of Loch Arch, which is in Glenlarkesdale, to the east of Tarbert. So as you go down to Glenlarkesdale and use a loop walk, if you look at the shores there, right now you might not see much, but in a few years from now, already you will start seeing trees popping out. There are quite a few thousand already in the ground. They're just very small right now. Along Avenan Path, which is a river that crosses the Postman Path coming from Urras, so just near Tarbert. There will be quite a few alder and birch as well. And then some of the places I showed you around, I was talking about Renigdol and Glan Trollomarek will be planting in that area on the base of Trollomul and Ben Harsin, which are two mountains dominating the landscape above Renigdol and the village of Mollingenish. So these shores already are quite rich in remnant woodlands in many ways. And so us planting there species that are similar species to the ones existing will also help make this stronger. So what is the incentive? Why do that? I mentioned it will strengthen our existing woodland. Obviously, the trees will have more other trees to help them grow and to support them. But it will have many, many benefits. Trees will regenerate damaged soils. As I mentioned, even though peat is dominant here, we used to have crops. We used to have to grow many, many things here just a few decades ago. And because the soil has been, fallow has been abandoned, it is not as healthy as it used to be. Overgrazing hasn't helped either. And trees will help regenerate the soil, and the soils will benefit, obviously, nature in general, but it will benefit cattle, it will benefit sheep, it will benefit also humans through strengthening some soils that are not peat, not proper deep peat, and at the same time not really healthy. It will provide shelter. Our red deer population doesn't know it yet, but they're going to enjoy it a lot, to have access to some woodland, at least. And it will provide shelter for birds. Climate change is affecting many things around us, everything around us. And one of the species, some of the species that are strongly affected are birds, small birds and migrating birds. Obviously, they migrate with changes of seasons, and as seasons have shifting temperatures, Some of the birds that used to come here a lot do not come anymore, or not as much. Others don't leave because the temperatures are not justifying them leaving anymore. And they have a commission in Lewis to find Gaelic names for loads of birds nobody in the Highlands had ever seen before that start coming about. So the woodland hopefully will help these species as well as they are here in Harris, and sustain them through whatever is coming with climate change. This will also strengthen native plants. I was mentioning how in the groves, many of the plants that grow there are plants that would not thrive elsewhere. It will strengthen invertebrates, which will suffer as well from climate change and can suffer from very, very slight temperature changes. And it might support also migrating fish if we plant alongside rivers and watercourses. And finally, and that's very important, I was mentioning how dh'òraid and dh'òraig include people and nature together. It provides a place for the community. This woodland is to be enjoyed by people as well. People will be able to go there, maybe, who knows, forage in the future and just enjoy a forest walk in Harris. And there are many studies, obviously, in past years that have also shown that these sort of things are just good for mental health, and we're probably all going to need it at some point. So, so yeah, it's a resource for everyone. And obviously, when you have loads of trees, maybe one day you can take one for some work or anything. So it's benefits all around, really, for us and our environment. And was a talk recently about flood resilience in Scotland, and apparently planting trees is very, very good for flood resilience. So who knows, we might also check that box in many ways. And yeah, these pictures from Arshful, if you go among the trees, if you have the opportunity to leave the path for a while and walk among the densest trees, you will notice that the soil is already extremely different down there. And many species the heather has completely retreated, and many other species are thriving. That's just an example of typical forest floor that you would not expect to find in Harris, but that you do find in Harris indeed. I guess that's really all for me. I kind of went through it a bit quickly, but if you have any questions, please let me know.
How much do you know about the climate 6,000 years ago? The climate 6,000 years ago?
I don't know much about it. I'm not a historian of these things. My understanding is that it was the shift between the Ice Age and the...
Much wetter.
So if I understand well, and correct Michael if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the transition from the Ice Age to the following era in the antiquity, it got a bit warmer than it was 100 years ago. There was a kind of shift. Is that it became wetter very suddenly, essentially, and it's this shift in humidity levels, fairly brutal, that the trees couldn't stand. Essentially, it is essentially formed that way. Loads and loads of biomass clothing watercourses, and instead of it just decomposing, it's just en masse turned into what we have. But no, I can't tell you much more about that.
How it would compare to today?
I don't think it's relevant to compare this kind of climate change we have today to. I mean, climate changes are a cyclical thing, and there was during the Middle Ages there was a micro ice age. So these things happen and change, but each of them are linked to their own specific situation. And how will the current climate change affect our forest, our woodland, what we're planting? And maybe we're planting this now, and things will happen we haven't planned for, and we'll at the end of the day only get older, and everything else will be dead. Probably not, but it's a sort of thing we can't really plan for. So it's hard to compare. Yeah.
How did you compile the list of trees that you were going to plant? You said that you introduced the older, which wasn't.
So how do we know which species to plant?
And like the oak, and that was a historic record say that there was oaks here at one time, or is that something that you decided to introduce?
No, so we can know. So obviously, some of the species I said we still have them, so that's a very clear indicator. For the others, two things can give you that information. You obviously, as I said, you dig the pit, you find trees, you can identify these trees, and some analysis can also tell you what's in the seed bank, what's under there.
Right, so that's like
so more
chemistry.
Yes, and obviously, I mean, as far as I know, most people have been cutting the peat and finding these trees for generations wouldn't, look at the fossilized tree trunk and think, that was an oak. But we're capable to know that. That's how we know about Scots pine, for instance. Because soil analysis in places like, I think Auchbully used to have Scots pine, will allow you to say, there used to be Scots pine here at some point.
I was going to ask about the Scots pine. There's none in Harris. Are there any in parts of Lewis or down here?
I don't think so. I haven't heard of any, or haven't seen any old Scots pine there. The thing is as well, Scots pine has some tolerance to flooding, but is a bit more sensitive than, say, older or the species. So if it's not helped, I don't think it would do very, very well in all kind of climate. We have Scots pine. It's a fairly small number. It's far from being a big percentage of what we're planting. The aim is to have some Scots pine in some areas in which we think that they would thrive. So you will find currently in Harris, but they're all replanted. There are Scots pine down in Glen Langedal. If you go all the way there, there are quite a few Scots pine growing due to deer grazing. Most of them are bonsai size, but there are quite a few that are fairly tall and healthy. We planted some Scots pines on Trollamul, so on the way to Reningdog, following the Postman Path. And there are two Scots pine in Glen Larcasdale, just by the car park. They're quite small as well, but they're doing very well. So, but yeah, no, to my knowledge, I haven't acquired extensively in Lewis, so they might have an old Scots pine hang out up there, but somehow I doubt it. If you didn't make it in our hills, I doubt that the bogs of Lewis will have provided a better environment.
Can I just ask you, the trees that grow in Harris, would they reach the full height of trees that grow on the mainland, or are they slightly smaller?
They tend to be smaller. You will have some fairly impressive trees, all things considered. And some of them will reach some fairly big height, quite a few meters tall. Most of the time they don't. So you might find a rowan tree that looks very young, very small, and actually if you get closer, the trunk is very, very thick and the tree is very old. But obviously due to what they have to do to survive, which is essentially, I mean, this aspen tree is essentially growing on a rock. So they don't get as many nutrients, they don't get as much space to extend because they have to grow in places that are hard to reach. So they will tend to be smaller. You will find the odd exception, obviously. But yeah, nothing like what you would see with clàradh poles, say, on the mainland. You won't find 20, 30 meters old trees. That's not an option here. It's for now.
How will you protect your young trees from predation?
The big plantation we're working on right now is deer fence and stock fence. So on the Urras side, on this side, essentially it's a stock fence. The crofters are part of the project. The common grazing there is supporting the project, so they've agreed to fence it off for stock, essentially. And on the other side, we use deer fence, so 2 lines of electrified fence. That's the key way we isolate area. Like elsewhere in Scotland, we have fairly high cull numbers. Now it's a problem throughout Scotland, so we have ambitious numbers when it comes to the cull. And this area east of Tarbert is essentially a no zone for deer. So stags are not very numerous anymore in that part, and we intend on keeping it that way for the time being. And in some other areas in the past few years, we've experimented as well with tree guards. If you go to the observatory in Miavak, you will see them. It has some success. It's very labor intensive. because you need to isolate each tree individually. And also, obviously, even though we reuse them to exhaustion, it's loads of material we need to dispose of at the end of the day. So yeah, it's a mix of things that works really well. In the current plantation site, you will have the odd stag that manages to get around the fence. They're fairly clever that way, but it will usually be a very, very few. And currently, it's a rat as well, and none of the trees we've been planting have been chewed on or anything. So it's working. Yeah, I give very long answers to very short questions. If you have anything else, let me know. Otherwise, you're not prisoners here.
That's good.
Where is that going?
Well, that gully is in Glan Problematic. So if you follow the postman path, you will come down the cliff towards dh'òraid to Eilean, which is this pebble beach in Loch Lomond, and you have this glen going up. So if you follow that river, it will take you there fairly quickly. And one of the other grove.
You can just see the electrified fence that Funch was talking about there.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Top left.
Yeah, it's a bit small if you want to come closer at some point. It's up there, yeah. This waterfall is, if it decides to go there at some point, it's a verse. Is just behind this other grove. So it's an area. It's especially aspen. It's very heavy in aspen that area. So yeah, it's well worth visiting. That's the thing, I think, in terms of just enjoyment of our hills as well, just enjoyment of our nature. These groves are really well hidden, and you could spend a lifetime in Harris. If you never leave the path, you might never see them. So when it's Caidh, for instance, is just by the path, they're hidden away. So dozens of people will walk that path every year and never know that if they walk 200 meters off the path, they will find a gully, and that in that gully are many, many healthy trees growing that at the heart of summer are covered in leaves and you have flowers, and it's very lovely. But from the path, you will never see it. So it's also a different way to enjoy our hills, to know that we actually have these oases that belong to Harris. They're not introduced, they're not foreign.